Right. Three, two, one. Greg, welcome back to the December 26er podcast. How are you?
Well, thanks for having me. I'm fantastic. I'm ecstatic. It's good to be back. It's been like 3 years
Oh my
since we.
God. So I looked it up because some of these like check-in guests are so far back that I don't even remember like the
Yeah.
episode number. You were episode 20
Wow.
and we're at 168. This will
Wow.
probably
No.
be 169. Yeah.
No. No. Don't say that.
Yes.
See that all these grays came in since last we
Yeah. So
spoke.
I have to go back
Ah,
because when we did these in person, we would take photos after
yeah.
every interview. So I got to go back and see if you had the salt and pepper joint back then. I don't
No.
think you did.
The pandemic did that.
Yeah. Let me tell you, you can't see them on this video because they're hidden, but I've had several gray hairs come in the
Yeah.
last year. It's
It was
crazy.
just it was stressful.
Hmm.
It's I think for any of us, the immense loss that our families, our communities. I lost some mentors of mine who are really close to me. And what's really weird about the pandemic is that because I tested positive for COVID really early on. I didn't know.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't know until I got the antibody test. But I only had a fever. There's some people who are just asymptomatic, and then there's some people just recently, one of my good friends, my line brother, lost his dad this week to COVID. So it's one of those things that it's just like unbelievable, like, a once in a century pandemic, and it affects so many people, so many different ways. And for me, life changed so much from switching jobs to working from home to adjusting. Like I just can't imagine. For I joke about it, but I think that's my way of coping. Like the entire world needs like some type of like mental health day, right? Like we all need therapy, like literally. Like we really lived through a pandemic, and we're still living through it right now.
Exactly. I mean, I've been having this conversation. I'm someone who has been in therapy through,
Yeah.
like, it was like halfway through this process. Like, I shouldn't even call it a process, but this time where I was like, all right, the constant news cycle, the heightened anxiety, all
Oh
of the
yeah.
grief, everything. I was like, I need to talk to someone. And at the time, I didn't even feel like it was heavily weighing on me as much as it is now. But I just knew. I was like, if this continues, what it's going to do to me mentally and emotionally, I can't. Like,
See,
so, and
but like think about what we went through. Like,
mhm.
so we went through a pandemic, right? So March was okay. Everything stops. Like the world that stop. Like stay inside. Do not go outside. Do not do anything. And for some people, introverts, they were like, yeah, all right, like. But for others, it was like, what am I going to do with my life? You know what I mean? Then we all, thank God, we have technology, so we adjusted to this two-dimensional world of seeing each other like on this medium right now, like just on screens, and like there was no touch and no like hugging or like grip, like nothing. And then we started consuming like online, like. I mean, did you look at Tiger King? Because I sure did. Like,
Absolutely.
like we started consuming just like stuff, and then we all like saw George Floyd get murdered. You know what I mean? And even in the face of a pandemic that was life threatening, like people are like, you know what? Like I can't stay inside for this. I got to go out and like demonstrate because enough is enough. And I think and just all of that in 1 year. Like,
Right.
it's like that's why I'm like, we all have been impacted by this pandemic one way or another. And whether we choose to admit it, I think we all need to talk to someone. We all need to say like this is how I felt during the year. Um, because I know I sure like, I appreciate my circle of friends because we kept each other connected and grounded because of you had to retreat back to your circle. And that was sort of like how I coped with it.
And what's crazy is I don't know one person who was not impacted by loss in the last year. Not one.
Same.
Everybody is in some cycle or stage of grief, which
Yep.
is nuts. You're used to having a situation where like you have your friend circle and somebody loses a loved one or a mentor and you all rally around that one person and you hold them up.
You go to the house, you sit down. Now, I'm going to talk for the culture. You have some good food. You know what I mean? Like, but all that is therapy, right? All of it is like, but we couldn't gather.
Right.
Like I had to sit on a funeral on Zoom, and I was just like, this is just odd. Like it was just odd, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, hopefully we're coming to the end, right? I don't know what the end is really, to be honest with you. I'm fully vaccinated. There was a whole sort of process that went through my head in terms of, should I get the vaccine? Should I not get the vaccine? But ultimately I decided, like, if the zombie apocalypse is going to happen, like, I'd rather be a zombie than the ones fighting the zombies. So, like, I'll just do it. That's a joke. I just, I probably shouldn't joke about that, but it's like, that's how you cope, but honestly, a lot of people are struggling with, should they get the vaccine or should they not? I would encourage people to, and, at some point, we will come to the end of this, but then we're going to have to look back and figure out what we did right, what we did wrong. I am confident that if another viral pandemic happens, because of what I experienced and what I saw, like, I need to really, really isolate myself, because unfortunately, a lot of people exhibited some really selfish behavior, and it just said a lot about us as a country, us as, the independence of the United States it's great in one way, but then when you need community to come together and band together and say, like, look, it's not about you, it's about your neighbor, that conversation just did not resonate for a lot of people around the country. And unfortunately, people exhibited their selfish ways. And, so if I have to depend on my neighbor, I don't know how much I will, because it's sort of like, all right, yeah, I know, I want you to stay inside to protect me, but you're probably concerned about your civil rights. So maybe I should, or your liberty. So maybe I should not. Right. So anyway, it was just a observation about, human behavior.
Agreed on all fronts. And similarly, I had a moment in the beginning where I was like, am I going to get vaccinated? How do I feel about this? But when the opportunity presented itself, DeMarcus and I both, we did it.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about the boosters and all that stuff that might have to come, later. But side effects and feeling like I had the flu aside for a day, it's something that I'm fully in support of. And I'm talking as someone who never even got the flu shot.
I never got the flu shot either. But listen, I got my vaccine. I got the Johnson & Johnson
Same.
4 weeks ago. Had the chills. But you know what? When I got the chills, I was like, all right, my little soldiers are getting prepared, right? They're getting ready. And so now, but the fear I have is that we all have a false sense of security, right? Because no one said these vaccines are 100% like effective, right? So you're going to start hearing stories about people who are vaccinated who contract COVID, and folks are like, well, why get vaccinated? Well, they'll still get it, but at least they won't end up in hospital on a ventilator. You know what I mean? Like, we have to understand, like, it's not, once you're vaccinated, you're never going to get it. It's just the severity is just diminished. And now we have a chance of, like, saving more lives. You know what I mean? So I'm just, I'm happy that I'm part of, the vaccinated crew that will at least try to do as much as possible to help us get to that herd immunity.
Absolutely. So thinking about how long it's been since we talked to you, back then you were serving as the commissioner of New York City Department of Business Services, Small Business Services, right?
Yeah.
That feels like a lifetime ago. You've gone through a couple of career iterations since then.
Yeah.
But let me ask. So, like, people, I mean, I remember when you came on the show, people were like, that's a big job. That's a big deal. Like, Gregg is set, that's incredible. And then, we hear that you're leaving. So what prompted the departure?
Oh, man. Okay.
To the extent you can discuss it.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? And I always tell people, these positions are all we are just keeping seats warm, right? Anyone from the mayor to commissioners, you've seen on the federal level, secretaries and presidents. Our job is to be stewards of the position, the role for the period of time that we're in, and to be good stewards and to do what we can to, make a difference at the time that we're there. So I always knew that at some point I would have to leave the position because, I started my career during the Bloomberg administration and then went through a transition and was very blessed to be put in a position as commissioner. So I was already thinking about how and when I would actually leave that position. The challenge is that, you have your plan and then God has, and I would say his plan, but, God has its plan, right? And literally, I did not expect the way things transition. I did not expect for it to happen that way, right? I will say that, there's never a good time to leave. And especially in the middle of a pandemic, especially March and April was the most difficult time for me in that position. I've been through disasters. I've been through Hurricane Sandy. I've been through, the random terrorist attack, steam pipe explosion, bricks falling off. There's all types of disasters that we face, well, business owners face just operating in a major city. And literally no one, not even us, was prepared for this pandemic. There's no business owner that had a business, recovery plan that said, I'm going to be out of business for a year, or I'm going to have reduced sales for a year. And therefore I'm going to have a nest egg. I'm going to have this, I'm going to have that. No one had a plan. The city of New York did not have the financial resources when we had our first loan program to help businesses just get capital. We had almost, if we were able to service all the requests, we would have needed $1 billion in terms of the need. We only had $40 million, right? So that's to show you the scale. I had people emailing me out of frustration in terms of not being able to get a loan, basically saying I'm responsible for their business collapsing. Literally this woman, and I will never forget this email. It was a Wednesday night around 10 p.m. I'm going through my emails. And she literally said that because of me, she is suicidal right now. And if she dies, it will be my fault. And so that's sort of so there's a couple things. One, when you're a public official, people just feel they could talk to you however they want, right? Because you are being paid by tax dollars, their money, therefore they feel that they have a certain level of entitlement to talk to you. Number two, everyone was dealing with stress in whatever way that possible they could. Some people lashed out, some people, channeled, some people. So I had to sort of be the burden of receiving a lot of that. Also had staff who, when you think about a disaster, there are staff members who are losing loved ones, but still have to show up and literally, help business owners. So it was just a lot happening. And at the moment, and I will tell you, George Floyd and our response to George Floyd, and when I say our response, the city's response, also weighed very heavily on me in terms of and I'll put it out there, literally the one moment that Friday when I saw, police officers driving into a crowd, right? Literally, we all saw this, everyone saw this. And this is the other part of the pandemic. We were all glued to social media. And then for us to come out and say well, they shouldn't have been in the street, right? It was sort of okay, we're missing the big picture here, right? And being a senior official in government with all this weight, it was just a moment where I just said, you know what? And then the mayor moved me into a role, which, in hindsight, I probably, would have stayed longer, but there was just so much happening that I just said, it's time for me to go. And so there's more to that story, but I think, publicly people just need to understand that number one, it's never the right time to leave. But number two, whatever you have planned, there's always going to be a different plan and you just have to adjust. So I had the unique opportunity to go to an amazing organization called Choral Leadership New York. I am an alum of one of their programs. And basically we teach people how to become better leaders. And, that's important to me because you saw how failed leadership can impact everyone. Like we saw it in Washington, uh, I will leave for the community to decide whether we saw it in New York City. But literally, when you have a crisis and there's a failure of leadership, you have a void and then it becomes chaos. That is why, Andrew Cuomo became the star, because the nation was looking to Washington for leadership and we just couldn't find it. So literally, Andrew Cuomo comes on and says, like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do this. He might have been wrong. And we know now there were some mistakes that were made, but at least in the moment, there was a decision that was made. And that's what leadership is about. But then leadership is also understanding about, equity and power and privilege and all the necessary factors that impact communities. And we saw how COVID-19 impacted minority communities. So we train, mid to senior level executives, young people coming out of college, how to become better leaders, but then also how to become civically engaged. So my job was to help them find a new executive director, which we did. I'm really excited about Adam joining. And so in the middle of a pandemic, I left one job, started the new job as an interim executive director. And then last week, I started a new job. Now, depending on when this airs, like I could tell you, but I can't tell you because we haven't announced, but I will tell you, let me put it this way. It is one of the most amazing opportunities that I have because I am working with a family who is very much invested in Brooklyn. They've created a social justice fund, and our job is to address, racial justice issues, economic mobility issues, and a celebration of the arts for BIPOC individuals, particularly Black individuals. So my job will be to stand up that foundation, and I'm working really, really hard to launch a new program to actually help Black and BIPOC-led business owners in the next 2 weeks or so. So that's a little tease and more to come on that.
So what I noticed is the more you talked about your progression away from working for the city, the brighter your eyes got and the more on your face.
So, I always say, and I've always said it in the past, you gotta give back, right? And I encourage everyone at some point in their career to work for government. I will say that especially in New York City, we have 8.4 million people, or 8.3, depending on who you ask, and everyone has their opinions, right? and we all know everyone thinks they have the right opinion. So there's definitely a level of stress that I don't think people appreciate. I think people assume government employees fit one particular mold. People don't realize that many a times, like on Friday nights, Saturday in the morning, like Sundays, like I'm working, right? I'm on 24/7. And part of it is just being responsive to our people. Like we are public servants. And I was always very specific about that word, a servant. And when you think about servants, like they are at the beck and call of their constituents, right? And in this case, it's the people of New York. So 11 and a half years, almost 12 years of that grind was a great experience. I'm not, listen, I had an amazing time, but I think now the smile on my face is the fact that I don't have the shackles of like being a public official. I don't have the shackles of tons and tons and tons of rules that you have to follow and disclosures and all that kind of stuff in order to just do the job that you want to do, right? People don't realize the amount of sacrifice that folks make to actually be in government. So whenever I see public officials, it's always good to say thank you. You may not like the politics, you may not like whatever, but they are actually making a huge sacrifice to do what they're doing. But yes, I'm excited. I'm back in the private sector. I will tell you this quick funny story. You know, when I started at Coro, there was you know, every Friday or so, you know, it's sort of like happy hour Friday, right? It's like a way for the employees to bond. And, you know, folks would have you know, a glass of wine or beer or something like that. And, you know, and I literally was like, are we allowed to drink alcohol on the job? Like, you know, it's just like, wait, we're violating some rule, like blah, 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 you know. So that's like, I have to like get all that stuff out of me because, you know, like,
Different world, completely different world.
It's a different world from where we come from, right?
Yes, but going back to the stress of working in city government, particularly in the middle of this global pandemic, and getting these kinds of emails where people's humanity and fragility are just on display. How do you maintain some semblance of peace and some delineation between your professional life and your personal well-being when you're
Oh my
getting
gosh.
messages like that?
Oh my gosh. Getting a little emotional right now because to be honest with you, it was tough. It was tough. It's hard not to take it personal. It's really hard, you know, because you question every decision you made, right? Was I, you know, did I not do the right thing? Did I not open up the application soon enough? Did we open it up to too many people? Like how, you know, how did I react to the stress of, you know, you have a mayor who wants this done now, but you want to be able to do it the right way. And, you know, and people are hurting. People, like, it's, you know, everyone was stressed. And the collapse of boundaries, right? Because remember, I could go into the office, I could deal with the stress, and then, like, literally, the minute I close the door and I walk outside and I take that commute home, like, that work is behind me to some extent, right? Until I pull out my phone and look at my emails. But at least there was some sort of like boundary between work and home. Well, guess what? I'm now in my home, in the sanctity of my home, and I'm dealing with the stress, like talking to people, and like, and there was no outlet. Like I couldn't. So what I actually started doing was running. Like literally on Saturdays, I remember in March, April, and May, I was really good. Like on Saturdays, I would just run. It's like almost like, remember when Forrest Gump was just sitting on his like porch and he just started running? like, oh, there goes that black man again. Right? It was just like, I just started running. Right. But at least I had a destination, you know what I mean? But like literally just running around, you know, to the waterfront around Brooklyn Bridge Park. And I'm a Cancer, so I love being near the water. It was so therapeutic for me. Now I was trash in terms of timing. Like, you know, I'm huffing, I'm puffing, but guess what? It was like, I'm running. You know what I mean? And so that's how I honestly, between running and between, you know, honestly leaning on my spiritual background and leaning on God and just like, look, you know, I'm leaving up to you. Well, you know, have your will, because I don't know what's going on right now. Like you know, I can only do the best that I can do. But it was really, really difficult not to take things personal. And you know, if there's anyone that could say they were able to separate the two, I'd love to know their secret. But honestly, you know, it was difficult for me, and to some extent, when I decided to leave government, and I left in July, literally a day after my birthday. It was almost like a relief. It was like a burden. You know, it was a burden that was lifted. Um, and the work that I'm doing now is actually addressing some of the things that I couldn't do when I was in government, right? I couldn't be in very much intentional on certain things because, like, we're government, we have to be all things to all people. But now I could say, like, no, I don't need to be all things to all people. This is the lane I'm going to operate in. This is the work that I'm going to be doing. And for me, it's all about, you know, BIPOC communities. You know, it's Black, right? It's Indigenous people of color. You know, what can we do to help those specific communities? Everybody else, you know, there's programs out there for you, but I just want to focus in this particular lane. So that's been a huge relief for me.
So even though you've had this relief, I know sometimes when you go through a traumatic experience professionally, it can really shake your confidence about your ability to execute. Did you have any of that once you walked
Yeah.
away and went into the next thing?
Yeah. So that's interesting. I would say that it pointed back to leadership, right? It pointed back to why it's important to have, people who understand like how to be good leaders, how to motivate a team. There were moments in time where I felt like, okay, I probably wouldn't have done it this way. I probably would have done it that way, but I'm not the guy in charge, right? So it did not affect me and my confidence. If anything, um, I will say that sometimes because you have blinders on and you're focused on this part of your career, you don't realize that if you are really good at your job, the impact that you've made in the community, that when you step away, I will tell you, I am so blessed. There were so many people who were in my corner. And when I say in my corner, and this is an important thing for your viewers, and I don't know if we talked about this, but your network is so important, right? Because you want to have, and I call them literally the cheerleaders in your life, right? It's literally the person that's going to talk about you, that's going to like rave about you when you're not in the room, right? That's the circle that you want to have. You don't want to have people who are talking about you negatively. You want to have people that's going to talk about you positively. And I cannot tell you how many people heard about opportunities and said, you know what? You should talk to Gregg. Or, you know what? Gregg, I just heard about this. Like, let me know if you're interested. I'm going to connect you, right? Literally so many people, there were so many opportunities that, I was considering after, once I was at Coral, because everybody knew I was interim, that it just confirmed that, the person who I became, the leader that I became, the work that I did, throughout the almost 12 years with the city, not only had an impact in the community, but I was able to make a connection that I will be forever grateful to the community. And therefore, they were all rooting for me, right? They were like, all right, thank you very much for your service. We don't know why it's happening now, but oh well, it's sort of like, how can we help you, right? So I was in a unique position to sort of say, this is what I want to do next, right? Sometimes we don't have that. We sort of take the next opportunity, whatever. But I actually said, nope, I want to work in this particular area. I want to do this particular type of work. And it so happened, and that's another thing that I would always encourage, like, a closed mouth don't get fed, right? So I literally told everyone who would listen, this is what I want to do, right? This is my dream job. And I'm so blessed right now that I am in my dream job, like literally, like I just can't, I mean, we'll talk offline, but I really can't like think about any other thing that I would want to do right now.
So, stepping back though to that interim period, this is interesting to me because you don't hear about us getting interim opportunities often, like to stand something up or to help to source the right executive.
Yep.
But how does that come about? Like, how do you make the decision to be like, I'm just here for this finite
It's
point in
it's
time?
it's so first of all, your network, and also, and you touched on it, the confidence that you have that you this is not the thing for you. It's a thing, but the thing is coming. And you just have to be confident that when you complete your assignment, that the thing that you want will be there. A number of us, and I've had, conversation with mentees all the time, especially people of color, because opportunity does not present itself often. Whenever it does, you jump on it, right? And sometimes, you stay in jobs because you're nervous about, well, I don't know if I'm going to find another job, right? Because it was so hard. The glass ceiling was so difficult to break that you just don't have the energy or strength to try to break another glass ceiling to get to where you need to be. So I get it, right? And so, but for me, there was a level of confidence that I had, and I think it goes back to what you were talking about. 12 years of working in government will give you a level of comfort that you know that no matter what happens, you have the necessary skills to do a number of things, right? Because this is not just like I'm a programmer, and so therefore I have like, Ruby and Rails, that's my skill set, that's all I know, that's all I want to do, right? Think about it. Like I was a commissioner, so literally a CEO of a company of 300 people, right? So not only do I know how to manage large organizations, but I had to be accountable to the people of New York City, the elected officials of New York City, the stakeholders of New York City. We had to launch programs that delivered results. We had results that, when you think about in the private sector, you talk about KPIs, right? Like literally our KPIs was public. If we did not meet those results, the press would report on it, right? We had to come up with comm strategy to make sure that we protected our principals. In this case, Mayor Bloomberg and then Mayor de Blasio. Like there's so many skill sets that like I had to muster in order to do my job effectively. So that's where that confidence came from, but totally get like why people would say like, well, if I'm in an interim position, I want to actually stay here. And so my network, because I was connected to people, when my network found out that I was ready to go, right, then opportunities came. And because I loved Quoro, right, because I actually participated, it was a great opportunity at the right time because it was just, I was ready to move on. They needed assistance. And so I knew that I would be able to step in. I didn't know what I needed to, there was a lot of work that needed to be done, which I didn't know, but I knew I'd be able to deal with it because I've dealt with like different size organizations in the past. And this was the refreshing part, because I knew it was interim, like I had a focus. It was like, okay, let's get A completed, let's get B completed, and let's get C completed. Once that's done, then I'm done. My assignment is done. And if I don't have anything, that's fine, right? I just recalculate my spending, my budget. But I'm confident that I'll be able to find something relatively quickly. The one stressful part was, doing these things in parallel, right? Because you're having conversations about what's next. You're focused on delivering on the mission. And in some cases, I remember one week I had like 3 interviews lined up. And I don't know if you've interviewed recently, but like the world has changed in terms of interviews, right? Now you have to present, you have to do like presentations and writing samples and blah, blah, blah,
projects,
blah, blah.
And it's a whole thing. Yeah.
Like, just talk to me. Like, like look at my resume. What else you need from me, right? But I get it, right? You want to make sure you hire the right person. And literally I had to juggle all of that while I was doing the assignment. So it was a little bit stressful, but at the end of the day, it was, I always say like I've been through the heat already, right? And been through the fire, and a little bit of fire just makes you much stronger, right? It's not going to hurt. So
yeah, I will tell people that this new way of interviewing has found its way into the legal profession as well. Like,
listen,
which I wasn't really familiar with it. And I'm at the point in my career where I get calls from executive recruiters like all the time. Yeah. So like this is maybe 12, 18 months ago, somewhere in there between that period. And I get this call and the opportunity sounded really intriguing. It was with like a major consulting firm, which will like remain, nameless.
Yeah.
And I go through, the initial screening process, have these great conversations. And then the executive recruiter hits me back like, oh, they want you to go through this exercise, right? And you need to block out an hour because it's timed. Like you're going to get an email with this case, like this problem to solve. And you have an hour to turn it around, right? And I'm like, is this the bar exam? Because I have not done this since I was trying to become a lawyer. And you're telling me like I haven't. And what's so funny about that for me is like as an attorney, that's not real life. Like you don't send me for the work that I do, like you don't send me an issue or a potential use case and I have to give you an answer in 60 minutes.
Right.
So I found the process quite interesting. I floated through it because I've been doing this a long time and I've decided I wasn't interested in the position. But yeah, like it's a lot of jumping through hoops.
What's interesting is that, when I was with the city, there were different divisions. So one of the things, I was proud of is being intentional, building a diverse team. And part of that intentionality was, whenever individuals needed to make a hire, every hiring decision had to be approved by me, right? I know it sounds like it's controlling, but hiring is not, like there is no bottleneck, right? It literally, I just needed to review who you wanted to hire, the resume of the person, who did you consider, right? And then I would look at, skill sets, diversity, did we have a good enough pool, diverse pool, et cetera, right? And if I didn't see a diverse pool, I'd say, no, you got to like go back, right? Don't tell me that this is the best person because you didn't have a good pool. All that to say, one of the conversations I had with one of the groups was, how are you, like, there was a written assignment and they were explaining to me the person didn't do well with the written assignment, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, can you show me this written assignment? Because I literally like, do you have something out there that I have to if I had to apply for a job, I may not even get the job, right? And I'm the commissioner, you know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, these are all like additional barriers that we also have to make sure that our people are aware of, right? I know they are probably trying to figure out how well you do under stress, how well is your writing like on the spot and all that stuff. But, again, we are fighting for, and when I say we, people of color, Black individuals are fighting because, first it was like, let's check your credit, let's check your criminal record, let's check all these things that I know you're going to have, sort of like a negative experience because of systemic racism. So now it's like, okay, let's introduce new things to figure out how we can like sift out, individuals. And I just want to be careful, and this is for all organizations, that we don't rely too much on sort of like, these practical examinations, et cetera, because then that becomes another barrier for diversity.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm a lawyer, but I work in tech, which is notoriously lacking diversity. And I'm very committed to creating those diversity pipelines within technical fields. And the research that I've been doing for these HBCUs, who have many of which have these incredible computer science programs, engineering schools, amazing talents. But when you look at the statistics, the amount of graduates that they're churning out, but then the small percentage who actually end up in jobs in their desired field, the disparity is insanity, right? And what I'm learning through this process is that they're getting the academic education, but they're not being prepped for how to succeed in these interviews, through these various projects and hack challenges and whatever else is there.
Mm-hmm. We heard the same thing. One of the programs that I didn't actually launch. This was the previous commissioner, but we were able to build upon the foundation that she laid, was the industry partnerships. And we spoke to tech companies and said, hey, why are you not hiring from like CUNY schools? And they said the same thing. Like a lot of the CUNY graduates, they don't know how to work in groups. They don't know how, there's a number of cultural things. And a lot of that stemmed from, guess what? Internship opportunities. Like they did not have access to internships. And literally, part of not having access is that we all know that if I work in tech and, I have a son, that I'm going to like ask my friend to, put my son on the list for another internship project. Right. And so it's that network again. Right. And if you, and I'm not going to call it the old boys network, but, in tech, it tends to be white male. So you're just seeing it, the sort of like the disparity in terms of demographic perpetuates because, you just have one group of individuals looking out for, each other. And so, it takes a while to dismantle some of these things. And that's why when we talk about building like an anti-racist organization, when we talk about white supremacy, some people are trying to make it into a political thing, but all we're saying is that there are structures that have been in place over time. And, and literally that structure has prevented from individuals of color from participating in the marketplace, right? So whether it's a good education, whether it's a good internship, which leads to a good job, whether it's, getting the capital that you need to like run your business, or getting the mortgage that you need to actually buy a piece of property that you could then leverage to build a better business. Like all these things are structural. And so people just need to have an open mind and understand that. And that's why it's important for us to really understand our history. And I think, we talked about, actually, we didn't talk about this, but when I was, talking to some of my colleagues in and out of government, one of the things that this country really needs to do is have a truth and reconciliation, sort of committee, sort of literally like what happened in South Africa. There are individuals in this country who do not want to talk about slavery and do not want to talk about Jim Crow and do not want to talk about, sharecropping and do not want to talk about anything that has happened. But literally think about this. We are in 2021, right? And I grew up in the 80s, right? And there are people who in my generation are descendants of slavery. Like literally their grandparents or their parents were slaves. And so this stuff this is not something that's like, we're talking about when the dinosaurs were running around, right? This is stuff that we're seeing the impact on generation. And so if we do not come to sort of like this accountability part and say, look, this is what has happened to this country. Just in the 60s and the 70s, did we stop redlining, right? So that's recent history. And if I can't own a home in Long Island because of the color of my skin, and that was only changed recently, and when I say recently, like in the 70s, that's in my lifetime, right? So what does that mean in terms of my ability to have equity, to then send my child to a good school, to then my child gets the internship opportunities that they need, to then get that good job that they need? Like all those things are part of why we need to really focus on addressing the systemic challenges that racism created within this country.
So thinking about the work that you're embarking upon, that you're incredibly excited about, and really impactful. Yes, like your cheekbones are way up, right? And I understand it, and I definitely have an appreciation for that passion. I also know that when you get into these roles, and this is knowledge that you've had from your previous career, but you get into the statistics of it all, really into the weeds on structural inequality and the barriers that we face, and the fact that it is systemic, it can become overwhelming. And you realize that no one organization is going to single-handedly solve these issues and really steer the ship in a different direction. So how do you maintain not only confidence, but I would say joy in the wins that you can manage and that you can attain, knowing that there's these overarching issues that you're not going to solve by yourself?
Bite-sized pieces, right? It's literally, and I tell folks this in terms of life, right? And this happens to me too. So I love the outdoors. I love hiking, right? And literally, and every hiker will tell you, like, you don't look at the peak, right? You look at every incremental steps and every station, because if you look at the peak, you're just going to become overwhelmed, right? You're going to be like, oh my gosh, am I ever going to make it up there? But you just take step by step by step. And that's what we have to do, right? And so the work that I'm going to be working on will be, incremental pieces of, hopefully the ability to prove that we can make a change in a small, and we couldn't say this in one administration, but pilots, right? Literally, we are going to try unique things. We're going to be entrepreneurial. We're going to try, different interventions. If it works, that's great. Guess what? We could then, using a number of other, individuals in our network, use that as a case study. And then because we have a strong network, hopefully using that as a case study will then encourage other people, right? It's sort of like, and I don't know if this is really true or not, but the butterfly effect, I've read that it's actually not true, but I still like the concept, right? Where a butterfly, like, it flutters its wings, and then like if all the butterflies flutter the wings, then they create like the displaced air, and then that displaced air then turns into like ultimately like a hurricane. Basically saying like the butterfly is like, but like literally just think about it. If we try something small in Brooklyn and it actually is effective, guess what? We now have a blueprint in terms of giving, that sort of like, here's a case study that you can use to prevent gun violence in Chicago, in Miami, in Houston, in LA, in Detroit, like in any other major urban center, because here are the things that worked, here are the things that didn't. Here's, here's a blueprint. Why don't you take it and customize it to your area? So that brings joy to me. The fact that I can test certain things, see if it works. And you know what? It's okay if we fail, right? And that's the other thing that you have to also, because in life, failure is all about experience. You will never find a successful CEO, any of the billionaires that you talk to, any of the millionaires that you talk to, they'll tell you the reason I got to this point is because I failed 110 times, right? And it was on the 111th time is when I hit success, right? So you can't be afraid to fail. And I think that is one of the things we're embracing is that, look, we are not going to have all the answers to the questions ahead of us, but we are willing to try. And we're willing to, get some really good thought partners to tackle this issue. And as long as I tried and gave it my best shot, then I'm totally, happy. And we just learn and we will just adapt, right? And that's the other thing. Like we have so much flexibility that we could adapt and try it again and try it again and try it again. So for me, it's bite-sized pieces, tackling and you chip away at the edges, right? And at a certain point, if you keep chipping away the edges, guess what? The whole thing collapses.
And I'm glad you brought up having the space to fail, because I think, and it's cultural, we've been socialized that we've got to knock it out of the park the first time, every time. And specifically when we're talking about issues of racism, structural inequality, and the like, there hasn't been really grace to iterate. Like, you have people with the money that hold the purse strings, these organizations, they're like, okay, we're going to give you some dollars to try to figure it out. And if what you do doesn't work the first time, it's like, well, we tried, that didn't work. We tried to recruit engineers from an HBCU. They failed. Like, that's just it. And not realizing that this literally is what has to happen. You have to be given the opportunity to try and make adjustments. And if it falls flat, it falls flat. But it doesn't mean that we don't get up and try again and invest more money and keep going until we figure out what really does work.
Isn't it weird that whenever we're talking about Black culture, and I'll just say Black culture, that the expectation is so high in terms of perfection? Like, I don't think there's any other, and maybe I shouldn't generalize, but I'll speak personally, right? As a Black man, I am expected to operate at 100% efficiency, 100% perfection. And if there's anything that I stumble on, then right? And when you talk about, and we started this conversation talking about stress and talking about the impact of like COVID, but the impact of just being Black in America, like literally the stress levels that we go through, the stress of having to be perfect, the stress of like, I've talked about this in terms of like, why do you think Black men tend to veer to like wearing suits, right? And not be casual, right? Because we're programmed that we need to be we need to look a certain way, we need to talk a certain way, we need and all that stuff, right, comes back from, again, slavery. Like literally, you trace it all the way back, right? So yeah, we're not conditioned to accept failure, right? It's almost like it's not, and especially now, I just said Black, but then if you're culturally, from the continent or the islands or anywhere else, like there's a whole other level of stress as well, right? In terms of, not being able to fail. So it's literally all of us in the diaspora, have a level of stress that's on us. And part of it is not being able to enjoy failure. And that is a luxury, right? Because failure for us, for example, and this is why like our conversations could never be an hour, right? If I want to start a business and I ask you for, I need $50,000 and I ask DeMarcus for $50,000, right? You have worked really hard for that $50,000. Your savings, are you going to think twice about giving me your entire savings to start a business? Because if I fail, it's not just me failing, right? But then like you are now out of your savings, which you may not get again, right? The market is out of it. So our failure has a compounded impact on the community, which is why it's so difficult for entrepreneurs, especially Black entrepreneurs, to get those angel investors, right? To get those individuals who are willing to invest in you and say, look, here's 50,000, you know, if you do well, I'll do well. If not, it's okay. I'll get 50,000 again, right? That's not a common language in our community. It's some of us, but not all of us, right? So like we are so conditioned not to fail that, you know, we don't realize that failure is part of life. Failure is actually part of success. And we just have to be bold and say, okay, right? The beauty about failure is that you need to have a plan. Like when you do fail, like what am I going to do at that point in time, right? And that's how we, I think, can manage our stress levels, right? Because if we, you know, I will tell you, sometimes I just really wish I had the confidence of like a mediocre, like white man, right? It's like, you know, they're just like, I'm going to run for president, right? I've never held an office before, but I'm going to run for president. Oh, I became president. Okay. Well, this, you know, like, look at this. We went from Obama to Trump, right? And that is like the epitome of what I just talked about. Obama wore a tan suit and it was like, oh my God, he's, you know, like, really? You know, like, and like this guy that just went out of office, like I could have run circles around him in terms of management. You know what I mean? But look how confident he was. Look how confident he was. And guess what? When he went to the banks, he didn't need to like, you know, I'm confident. Like, no, this deal is going to work. This deal is going to work. Okay, here's $20 million, right? You know. Meanwhile, like we go to the bank and they're like, you don't have any experience in this industry. Like, you know, why do you think this is going to, you know what I mean? Like there's just a level of like a different type of reaction. So anyway, all I'm going to say is like for our people, look, let's get together. Let's celebrate failure. Let's celebrate each other, you know, but more importantly, let's support each other. Like we got to support each other. That's one of the things. And, you know, I'll talk about it later on. When I say later on, we may need to have another check-in when I'm in my new role, but I want to instill a sense of community because I think that is what's missing. You know, it's sort of like, you know, it takes a village, right? So it takes a village to do everything. It takes a village to support a small business. It takes a village to support a young person. It takes a village to support each other. And, you know, growing up in Grenada, like I grew up in a village, right? My grandmother knew everyone in the area and everyone knew me. So it's one of those situations where if I was not behaving, you know, you know, like in the park, someone knew who I was and would either discipline me at the time, right? Even though they weren't like my parents or anything like that, but they felt they were responsible for me, or it would get back to my grandmother, right? And then I would get disciplined even more, not only for behaving bad, but for embarrassing her, right? So that sense of community is gone, right? That sense of community is gone in terms of like, I need to find, you know, one of my friends, he has, you know, he makes, and I was going to actually wear it for the interview, but then like I spilled something on it. But he does like a polo shirt line, right? It's Baobab, right? And literally, you know, we've got to rally the community. This is two Black men who are in retail, right? We need to find and be intentional about finding Black owned businesses. We need to be intentional of like, okay, you know, if that shirt should normally cost $50 and, you know, he's charging 60 or 70, it's okay, right? Because I'm going to support, right? Let's not focus on the fees and the funds. It's more about supporting because we know if we support each other, then your success is my success because studies have shown that Black owned businesses hire within their community. We're hiring our own people, right? At a far more greater rate than other owned businesses. So again, we have to see like the support that we're giving you is like, I'm not in, you know, yes, your prices may be higher, but like I'm going to support you because ultimately you're going to support the community. So there's a lot we could talk about in terms of like, you know, that sort of like thinking. But again, it's all about the realities of we just have to accept failure. We have to understand how, when we are successful, how to reach back and help each other. You know, there's so much things that we need to do. But I think we're almost there. Like as a community, that last year has been really impactful, and certainly has shown the power that we have as a collective, as a voice, when we're like enough is enough.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to definitely touch on and tie back to what something that you said earlier is around this idea that not only we have to be perfect, but like this is the one opportunity. And that comes in not only with investing, but also I think in job opportunities, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned having all these conversations, taking these interviews. What I see happening is someone who I know who's, Black, person of color, they hear about a job and they go in, somebody has referred them and they have the conversation and it goes well. But as the interviewee, they're like, I don't really know if this is the right thing for me, but they
Mm-hmm.
feel pressure to accept it because
Mm-hmm.
subconsciously we often think that this is the only
This is it.
shot we have.
And
This is
guess
it.
what? And guess what? They're offering me, $150,000, but I actually really want $200,000. But you know what? I'm afraid to ask for more because they may say no, and then I may
Mhm.
lose the job. Right? This is all the things that we're conditioned, and it's literally because we don't operate in a just system, right? So we don't know if the next opportunity there's going to be someone who is biased, right, and may say no, not because I'm not like I'm skilled for the job, but they may say no because of the color of my skin. There's always that in the back of my mind, like, am I going to get this job or am I going to lose this job? Not because I'm not qualified, but because of the color of my skin, right? And so that constantly plays out in I think, every time we go on interviews. So that's why when we do find something and we do get that opportunity, we're just like, I'm not going to push it, right? I've had several conversations about salary negotiations, and that has always been, one of the challenges like our people face in terms of like how to ask for more, how to say no, right? And I always tell people, go in there and don't assume that that's going to be the only job that you will ever have or be eligible for or hear about, right? And I always tell folks that if you're not happy now going in, then don't take the job, right? So if you're not happy about the salary, if you're not happy about negotiations, then don't take it, because that is going to be your world for some time, and you don't want to be miserable, your first couple of days in the job.
And if you go in trailing on the salary front, it's only going to continue. There is rarely that calibration where you make up for what you didn't get in that first salary
You
negotiation.
know what I tell, and do not, and this is the thing that people, oh, we'll try you for, we'll bring you in at 150, and then 6 months later we'll get you to 200. No, 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 no.
Not happening.
Like, the Seinfeld, no, 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 like, no, now, right?
Now,
Because what I tell people is that whatever salary you negotiate now, assume you're going to be in that salary for the next 3 years. So look at your budget, look at your life. Things change, yes, but look at all the goals that you want to accomplish. And if you can't do it with the salary that you're coming in right now, like, then that's not either the salary that you need to be negotiating, or that's not the job for you. And I know it sounds like really rigid, but it's, and there are companies, I'm surprised there's some companies out there that will, after 6 months, they will actually give you that bonus, or after a year, because you work so hard, they'll, move it up. But you and I know, but a lot of people don't know, when you're sort of making, suggestions for salary increases, there's a certain range in terms of percentage, right? It's like 1%, 2%, 3%. You're not hearing 50%. You're not hearing like 30%, right? It's like literally, the HR folks start like heads exploding when you're like at 10%, right? So that's why it's like, your salary will increase, but by small increments, no matter how hard you work. So just be ready that the number that you want is the number that you get from the very beginning.
yeah, because you will hear that we have bands and we can't extend beyond the band. It's all this HR speak, which is why that sense of community is so important. And we need to start disclosing more the money piece. And
Yep.
anybody that calls me and says, I get calls in the legal profession all the time. I'm moving from Wall Street, I'm going to startup space, or I'm going from startup back into a large organization. What do I ask for? How did you
Yeah.
achieve X, Y, and Z? And I'm very forthcoming about that because we don't have the exposure. In addition to just being socialized to take what we're given, we do not have the knowledge base often to go in and even know what we should be asking for. So the first offer that comes down is like, well, my grandmother never made this kind of money. My parents, like,
See,
and not realizing that you're trailing behind the man right next to you who doesn't look like you and who's doing the
oh
same
my,
exact job.
you are, listen, you're hitting on so listen, we're comparing ourselves to each, like literally to others in the community. But remember, as a community, we are way behind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like literally, when we think about salaries and when we think about like our earning potential, we need to think about what am I worth, right? What's my skill set worth? And not compare it to anyone else, right? It's that number is personal to you. So I always say, like, look, how much are you worth? Like, this company wants you for a reason. They want your skill, they want whatever it is. Like, what is your number? Like, don't think about like who else was in the role or whatever, because who knows? Like, they have a different skill set, they bought a different thing, but what's your number? It's helpful to have like the boundaries. But I always, and then some people are like, am I asking for too much? I'm like, well, are you worth that much? Yeah. Well, no, you're not, right? And then it's up to the company to decide whether or not they want to make that investment. But absolutely right. One of the things I loved about working in government was everybody's salary was public.
Public.
Yeah. You just had, there's no way you could actually have like pay parity issues, right? Because everybody knew what everybody like made. But I think, more and more in the private sector, you're getting people who are, and especially like when we have these types of conversations, it's important for you to know, like, okay, this is how much, individuals make in this particular area. And, understand that if I tell you my salary, I'm actually at a discount as well, because, there are other individuals who probably would have made more based on, either their experience or whatever, right? So you have to just take all that data in and then figure out what your number will be.
Absolutely. So shifting gears before we let you get out of here, this is a question we've been asking everybody in these check-ins. You're kind of outside already, right? But when we reach this herd immunity and we're free to do all the things that we used to do, what's the first thing you're going to do?
Oh man. Oh man. I have so many first things that I want to do. But you know what? I will be totally honest with you. One of the first things I want to do is just go to a concert. Whether it's Afropunk, whether it's everyday people, like I just want to be around people. I want to be like rams, like body to body, just moving with the music and the energy, and just like, I just want to like, you know, I just want to have that feeling again, like that euphoria of like just hugging friends and like, just listening to good music. Yeah, that's like one of the first things. I have a long list, right? Because I need to go back to Grenada, sit on the beach, hang out. I want to go to South Africa, hang out. Like, there's a whole bunch of like things that I want to do, but I just want to be around people. I'm big on like just energy, and I miss that, and I think that will be the ultimate, right? Because I looked at and you know it I realized when I get to a certain age, when you start losing like your childhood, like celebrities and all that. So DMX recently passed, right? And DMX, I grew up in New York City, and so one of his concerts, it was I think the World Concert, right, where he performed. I mean, just as far back as the eye can see, was just people. The first thing I thought was like, oh my god, like look how many germs are in there. Like it was just like it's like, oh my god, they're so like packed. But then I was like, but I want to be there. Like I want to do that. I want to like be like literally like smashed together with people, because then I know that we've passed the curve, right? And then you deal with like the regular cold and all that kind of stuff. But that's a moment that's really that's what I'm looking forward to.
Concert is high on my list. I didn't like being smashed together before COVID, so not happening after. Gonna just say that right now. I'm really moving this place in
Listen.
my life where I just want my like skybox VIP lounge. I said it on here
Oh, no, no,
before.
no, 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 no. You got to be in the crowd. And then, like, the certain song comes and you're in that cipher and everybody was like, moving and dancing and da da da. Like, oh, man. Like, everyday
Yeah,
people, if you've not been to everyday people, like event, you got to. But it's either that or Afropunk. Afropunk, hands down, I love like the lineups of Afropunk. So hopefully this year they have it. It's in August, so it's kind of
touch and
iffy.
go.
We'll see. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I
I'm
will
ready.
say this though. The first concert I go to, when the lights go down and that opening refrain, that those crazy live intros that they do, I might actually cry. I'm not even
Yes.
exaggerating. I might actually cry the first time because that's me. Like music is
Yeah.
my thing, right? Concerts are my
Yeah.
thing. So when
Yeah.
I first get to hear that sick opening at a show
Yeah.
that's not on the
Yeah.
album, I
Yeah.
might shed a tear or two. I'm not gonna lie, I might shed a tear.
But we realized like we survived. Like
Yeah.
literally, our grandkids. We have to tell our grandkids like the pandemic of 2020. What was it? 500,000 Americans did not. You know what I mean? That's not a small number. And as you said, we all have been impacted by it. But I think it's definitely an opportunity for us to reset, right? For those who survived, and think about like what really life is about, right? And if you and there are, I saw this during the pandemic, use this time to learn a new language, do this, da 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 da. You know what? If you didn't, that's fine, right? If you just focused on your mental, that's totally fine, right? But I think coming out of this, we also need to say like, okay, what happened cannot happen again, right? So we need to look at our health. We need to look at access to healthy foods in communities of color. We need to look at education, going back to the fact that so many people working from home that could work from home, right? There's a whole bunch of, workers didn't have the luxury of working from home. And then there are other individuals like, oh, you can work from home. Well, what happens if home has like 20 people in it and like barely any broadband? How can you even be like efficient at home? So there's certain things that I think that this pandemic has sort of removed, I would say, the scales, right? And now we're seeing the rawness of inequality and how it impacts community. And now we got to heal, right? We got to put the ointment on. We got to like, okay, this is how we're going to fix this, right? And these companies, and I'll stop with this one right here. There's a major bank, right, that literally made commitments to the Black Lives Matter movement. They talked about, and I know, and I know individuals that back personally. I know the CEO. I know, I know a lot of folks, and I know they're very committed. I'm a shareholder of that company. I get my shareholder voting proxy thing, and there's there's different things that you'll vote on, and in one of them it says produce a racial equity report, and literally it's about hiring, it's about investing, it's about all that kind of stuff. That is the thing that I would expect a company like that, and knowing the people in it, to be progressive. Do you know what the board said? No. Like their recommendation is no. And I went ballistic. I was like, how could the board not understand like this is a moment in time? And I think the more of that type of reaction where people are like, no, we need that, right? We're not going to tolerate like just empty lip service. We're not going to, thank you for that $100,000 that you just donated to HBCU. But guess what? No, we need more, right? We need $1 million. Or no, we actually need a seat at the table, like on your board, right? I think we are in that moment where people are emboldened to say, we're not going to accept the status quo. It's enough, right? We've had enough, and this is where we're headed. And you could either join us or get out of the way, right? Because we are now taking control of our community and our lives.
And that's a great note to end on. There's nothing to be said after that. So thank you. Thank you for
I
coming
love
back
it.
on the show.
Thank you
And
so much for catching up. And I'm so thrilled to be part of this series, and looking forward to more conversations, because there will be more. Hint, hint,
oh,
wink, wink.
absolutely. Yes. There's a lot more that will be discussed based on where you're headed. And I appreciate that we didn't have to go through a bunch of red tape to get you back on the show like we did on the first episode.
Oh no,
'Cause
right.
government was all in that.
That's
Okay.
what I'm talking about, the difference in the government, right?
So where can people find you online?
Oh, so it's really easy. GreggBishop.nyc. So it's Gregg, Gregg, Bishop.nyc. You can find out more about me, the work that I'm doing, the work that I've done. It's my personal space online. On Instagram, it's Gregg Bishop. And on Twitter, it's Gregg Bishop NYC. So you notice the brand, it's like all tied to New York City. But
Absolutely.
that's where you can find me.
So listen, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. There's going to be a part 3. I already know it. It's going to
Of
happen.
course.
To our listeners, you know what to do. If you've enjoyed this episode, like, share, subscribe, comment, tell somebody about the show. We are all about knowledge sharing and building ourselves up as a community, like we've discussed for the last hour and change. So if you've got information that you feel like is beneficial to you, pass it on to your brother, pass it on to your sister. And as always, remember to be extraordinary.